On the last video, I built the base cabinets for a new workstation in my studio. It went pretty well, but I felt from the beginning that the most challenging part of this build would be the actual desktop. On the plans, the top is about 14 feet wide by 23 inches deep. I decided to make this out of 2 layers of Baltic birch ply, and because the longest sheet of birch you can get is 8 foot, I was going to have joints in each layer. My idea was to stagger each of these joints and then laminate the 2 layers to reinforce them. That's the idea anyway, so let's get started.
Shut up and sit down.
I started by cutting 2 sheets of birch as closely down the middle as possible. This gave me 4 panels that were roughly 8 foot long by 24 inches wide. That done, I could get each panel cut to length and then start to think about what I was going to do about joinery. The front edge of this top is a focal point of the desk, and I didn't want these staggered joints to be visible at all, so I needed them to be very tight and precise. I ended up using dominoes for alignment and lots of pocket screws for clamping force. I was a bit skeptical this would work, but once done, I was left with 2 panels that were around 15 foot wide and 24 inches deep, and could start laminating them into one. After sanding the mating surfaces to 160 grit, I rolled out a liberal amount of glue and then laid one layer on top of the other. To clamp, I started from the inside out using screws sunk into the bottom of the desktop, and finished with clamps on the outside edges, paying particular attention to the one edge that would be visible. That sucked. The next day I cleaned up the edges of the top by cutting it down to final depth and cutting it closer to final width. Then I went ahead and applied a finish to the bottom using 4 coats of poly hastily applied with the roller, sanding between each. I honestly didn't care about the finish quality at all, but it turned out surprisingly well. From there, I cut 3 holes in the top for wire management. These will be used for cable pass-throughs for my video monitors as well as my studio monitors mounted on either side. And with that done, I could tackle the Wilson Art laminate I wanted to use for the top surface of the desk. I found a great deal on a 14-foot long roll of the stuff, but when it came in, it only measured to just shy of 14 feet. I was running short on time, and I decided I was going to have to deal with the seam in the laminate. I did this by taping 2 pieces of laminate together, leaving them overlapped by a couple of inches. I then made a square cut down the middle of that overlap. This left me a seam that should match perfectly once glued down to the surface. But the glue up. Holy hell. It was stressful. So stressful that I forgot to turn on the camera before my daughter and I wrestled the laminate onto the strip separating the 2 glued surfaces from one another. And then... Damn. Man. If that's going to be salvageable or not, we'll just have to see. I knew it was going to happen. Somewhat amazingly, I got lucky. The laminate cracked right up to the edge of the desktop and then just stopped. I got away with no damage at all, and the seam turned out perfectly. Next up, I used a router to cut the laminate flush to the top, did the same for the wire management holes, and then added a very slight bevel to those holes as well as to the outward facing edge of the desktop. One of the things that I've paid particular attention to throughout this whole project is the exposed plywood edges that are featured in numerous places. This leading edge of the desktop is the most important of those, and I really took care to put a nice finish on it. I think in total I did 7 coats of satin poly on this edge, sand poly, sand poly, sand poly, until I was left with something that wasn't glossy at all but felt like satin and should be very durable. But now it was time to move the top into the studio and get it placed in its home. I'm not sure what this thing weighs. I'm guessing somewhere close to 300 pounds, but all I had for help was my 13-year-old daughter, and she shocked me. Not only with her utter strength. It's gonna go like that.
Ready?
You sure you can do it? Move your hand. I can't believe you did that.
It's not that heavy. I can hold 2 girls on my shoulders, Dad.
Yeah. But it was also one of those times when you realize your kid has surpassed you in intelligence.
Slowly scooch the desks over there. Just glide it on. I think that's the best bet, honestly.
No, you might be onto something. Pretty humbling moment, but at least my desktop was mounted and ready to go. The next thing to do was to get my drawers mounted. I did this in the same manner that I've done it in past projects, using spacers made from scrap to mount the slides, taking measurements, and then cutting more spacers to mount the drawers to those slides. This went quickly, and I could move on to mounting the drawer fronts. I first measured the cabinet opening, and then cut some scrap 3/4 inch ply to match that opening. Off camera, I then added some Wilson Art laminate to that panel and then ripped the sizes off the panel to match the drawer fronts that I needed. This creates perfectly sized drawer fronts if you are using a thin kerf blade on your table saw and a nickel to space your fronts. So, design choice here. This would have looked better had I made this drawer the same depth as this top drawer, so I'd have a continuous seam here. The reason I didn't do that is because my printer's below this one, and I needed as much vertical space as I could get to access the paper and see the UI on it. So yeah, it just sort of is what it is. I gotta live with it. It doesn't kill me too much. I had thought about doing like a radius to meet that line, but I just kind of got lazy, and honestly, it doesn't really bother me that much. Anyway, that done, I could move on to the drawer pulls. I bought a really nice dog leash, cut it into strips, added some grommets, and presto, Porsche RS inspired drawer pulls. I'm in love with them. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here, and out of chronological order. Before I did the drawers, I actually started on wire management, and this started with getting both my video monitors and studio monitors mounted to their homes. From there, I caulked the desktop as well as the edges of the cabinets that met the adjoining walls. And then I could finally start thinking about hiding the wires that run under the desk itself. Now, originally, I had thought I was going to build some sort of a channel out of birch, but I was browsing the aisle at Home Depot and got an idea. These are just conduit wall clamps. I bolted them to the bottom of the desk and then just ran the wires through them. So long as you are taller than about 4 foot or so, you can't see this rat's nest at all. So yeah, good enough for me. From there, the wires run into the cabinets and are hidden by the drawers. It's a pretty clean setup, and best of all, the wires as well as the units they run to are all still fully accessible. The last thing on my to-show list was something I did more for my kids than anything else. They watch a lot of YouTube gamers, and all of these guys use these crazy LED lights in their setups. I decided to sort of emulate that, and also accentuate my floating cabinets a bit. The light strips are held onto my toe kick with double-sided tape, and if I'm totally honest, I'm not a big fan. I need to figure out a way to diffuse the light a bit better. As it stands, they give off kind of a 1980s strip club look, but you know, it's for the kids. And that's it. It's done. For the most part anyway. I still have to redo the shelving above the desk, and I'm in the middle of a sort of nerdy DIY technology project that will eventually live between those shelves. Overall, I'm pretty happy. In fact, I think this might be the first project I've done that could pass as professional in the aspect that I completed it in a timely manner. I think altogether I have somewhere around 20 hours in this thing. In any case, I think I'm done making movies of cabinet builds for a while. I feel like I've documented the way in which I do things pretty thoroughly, and there's no use in beating that horse further. I do, however, need a new keyboard, and I've often thought something like that would be fun to build. So, stay tuned.